I am gaming. I am gaming. I am gaming podcast.
Hi everybody, my name is Ivica. Thank you so much for being on my latest episode of I Am Gaming Podcast, a podcast about the video game industry, entrepreneurship, gaming nostalgia, and many more things I find to be in the same realm of creative and business ventures. This is episode 58 and it's going to be about the lessons and the educational value that the whole case of Cyberpunk 2077 brought about. So I already talked about this topic in my previous episode where I talked and mentioned the issues surrounding crunch and crunch time in game development industry, how I see it as a huge issue that is only ramping up and becoming more prevalent, not in a particular location, but basically all over the globe. This time around I'm going to talk about the fallout, no pun intended, of the same approach that is becoming more and more clear in the weeks and days that have came after the release of Cyberpunk, and the issues that surround it, which in my view are not accidental or a fluke, but something that came about from a systemic or system-wide failure of CD Projekt Red and their approach to project management in this case. Before I get into that, a huge thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. Like always, your presence is what makes this podcast possible. A big thanks especially to my new Patreon supporter, the game Trackmasters that you can get on Steam. If you like indie racing titles, you're going to love this because it uses procedurally generated tracks. You'll never drive on the same track twice. So check out this game in the description below. There are links from all of my patrons, so check them all out. They're all amazing people, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you. You really make I'm Gaming Podcast something that can become a real thing, not stay in my head. Of course, if you like to join all those crazy cool people on the same Patreon page, please check out the link in the description below as well, or just check out my book on how you can use simple psychology to overcome procrastination and do a bunch of things instead of wasting it on TV shows and games. I'm kidding, it's not actually wasting time if you're enjoying it, but it's kind of useful to get other ideas about the time you're spending on your entertainment or leisure and how that time might be procrastination or might not. You're the judge, but my book will help you in any case. So, Cyberpunk 2077, it's out. First, the reviews were great, they were raving, then they started to mention some bugs and issues and performance problems and blurry graphics, and then the big change, the big moment happened when the PlayStation Play Store said on December that it's removing the title and it's offering refunds to everyone who bought it, which was a big deal. This is not something that Sony does lightly or often, and of course the hammer went down and it's coming down in the wider public about the whole development process and the end result of Cyberpunk 2077. First of all, I want to underline this: the developers, people who actually made the game in the trenches, who programmed, wrote and everything else, did all of these procedures on the game, in my view have absolutely nothing to do with the failure of the game. They did the best they could do in really terrible circumstances. The blame squarely and completely falls on the management of the company that developed the game. Basically, they rushed it, they wanted to get it out before Christmas, they got their wish, but that wish, like in most stories, came with a poisonous tip on the end, and that tip is being delivered to them right now. Even though the game is successful in monetary terms with this amount of marketing and overall hype, it would be almost impossible for it not to be. But it's still an important lesson about the value of crunch and its ultimate usefulness, which is exceedingly rare because in the long run you are doing what we're basically doing to the planet ever since the late 18th century. We're tapping it dry, getting some value from it, but losing a lot in the long run. The same is happening here. You might push out a title, it might be at the stores before some deadline, but it will come at a cost. This cost is visible here, bugs and everything else that the whole project should have cleaned up by now, thanks to those crunch times, to extensions of the release dates, were still there. In a better world, CD Projekt Red would simply say, yeah, we're moving the game 6 months, 8 months in the future, but that isn't possible. Also, the whole concept of the pressure from shareholders and owners of the company who simply want to see the game come out is also something that's breaking upon the management. So they have their pressures, that's unmistakable, and there's no denying it differently, but they are still the ones to blame here, sadly for them, and the fallout needs to come on them completely, because they have to be something like a circuit breaker which allows some pressure to go on the development team to rush them, to slow them down, to change things, but not all of them, because all of the pressure from getting the game out now became focused on the team. The team went into crunch. There was a lot of fallout even before the game came out, because the management said there won't be any crunching time, and there apparently was, not apparently, there was, and not a bit, there was a lot. You're leaving your workforce embittered and angry. The thing that the developers should do at this point would be simply to unionize. I'm not sure if they have some kind of a worker protection agency or organization, but it shows that things like this make it necessary, because otherwise the profits and the pressures from those profits will always win over the actual developers, who will end up with less money than they deserve and with a lot more problems that rise from crunching. But ultimately, again, we're seeing that it simply does not pay off. You can't throw people into the meat grinder and get diamonds in return. That is not how things work. You can't tap the earth dry and then expect to live in a beautiful, nature-friendly utopia. Instead, you get a very polluted, very combustible 2020 planet where a lot of things are going wrong. The same applies to Cyberpunk. You can't pressure your workforce month after month and then end up with a perfect, beautiful, wonderful game. And that's a big lesson for everyone, small team, medium team, large team. That's not the way things work, basically. And sadly for everyone who wants to be a business tyrant, you cannot become a robber baron in 2020 in the game development industry. That ship has sailed, that train has left the station long time ago, and CD Projekt Red is learning that the hard way. So in your case, if you do management, project management, or you own a company, have these lessons or this main lesson in mind when you get to a point where you have to decide what is going to suffer, your deadlines or your workforce. Cyberpunk 2077 clearly shows that there is no easy way out that can simply take people, tap them dry, and produce a perfect, wonderful, highly scored game that's available on all markets. Instead, Sony is going to pull it, so think about it and try to make the best possible bad decision you can make at that point. That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of I'm Gaming Podcast. I talked about Cyberpunk 2077. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a like or a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts on this project and the game itself. Of course, if you really like it, the podcast consider supporting me on Patreon. And that's it from this episode. Again, a huge thanks to everyone who stuck through it, and I'll see you on the next one in exactly 7 days from now. Until then, my name is Ivica and have a great week. Bye bye.